Welcome back to another episode of Science Behind the Magic. This is a Halloween edition, so spooky. Basically, I wanted to talk about vampires today. We all know them. I don't know how you were first exposed. For me, it might have been My Mother Has a Date with a Vampire. That was like a Disney Channel movie. Also, of course, Buffy and Twilight. I tried to read Salem's Lot as a kid. By kid, I mean 15. It did not go well. I stopped halfway through. Also, even in the superhero lore, if you've ever watched Blade 1 or 2, which recently watched, I think they hold up personally, especially when you think of how it happened before The Matrix. It's pretty wild. But basically, vampires are pervasive. They're in The Witcher, they are in horror movies, Dracula is timeless. You will always have vampire hunters or paranormal romance with vampires throughout our media. But where did they come from? What inspired these myths? What gave them these symptoms, so to speak? And that's how I want to look at it today, through science behind the magic with a medical twist. Essentially, I want to look at two medical things that I think led to some of the larger points of vampire lore and mythos. So starting with porphyria. This is a liver disorder. It's fairly rare and it's genetic. So that's the first thing I want to say is I don't want you guys to go deciding you have porphyria. It's fairly rare. And what we need to know before I go deeper into this disease is the role of blood in the body. So blood is important. There are many forms of it. If you remember from my first Science Behind the Magic way back in like February, I talked about blood type and the importance of blood type with transfusion and childbirth and how that can be used in different mythologies, particularly in the Inheritance trilogy. But basically here, the only thing you need to know is that blood is the carrier of oxygen in the body. So your body needs oxygen. I feel like we all know that. It needs it for many chemical reactions, and the way cells get blood is through your blood vessels that carry red blood cells. So we're gonna focus only on red blood cells. We have many different types of blood cells, and particularly we're gonna focus on this one protein component called hemoglobin. Now, I actually know a little bit about hemoglobin, so if you have any questions about it, feel free to answer down below. It's something we study a lot in biophysics because it's a pretty easy protein structure to study, but it's made of 4 what are called myoglobin, and all you really need to know is each myoglobin has a heme. Heme is a thing that has iron on it, and this iron can attach to oxygen. So this is why knowing your iron levels is quite important, and someone who's anemic or has low iron has less useful red blood cells, at least for the purpose of transporting oxygen throughout the body. If you have a low iron count, that means you have less binding sites for oxygen, and that's going to be a problem. So why am I talking about this? Well, porphyria is a disease that reduces the amount of viable heme. It affects the biogenesis is what we would call it, but basically how heme is made is affected with porphyria in a negative way. So that's part of it, right? So vampires need blood. People with porphyria tend to need to acquire more iron-rich sources in their diet. They tend to have this anemic profile with their health background, so that's part of vampirism, right? But if that were it, why wouldn't I just say, well, people with anemia inspired vampirism, right? There has to be something more, and there is. So not only does it make you anemic and you have less viable red blood cells, you also have a sensitivity to outside light. And this is because there's this chemical that gets produced called protoporphyria IX. This chemical gets produced to a level where when you're outside, it will interact with the UV light and cause your skin to blister. So the combination of these two things and the fact that it's genetic, the hypothesis, this is just a hypothesis, it's just kind of a fun mental game, but you have small villages in Eastern Europe or West Asia, because that's around where the mythos, I think, started. I could be very wrong and feel free to correct me, but the idea is you have these small villages, so there's a lack of genetic diversity. And so you have people who tend to be anemic, tend to maybe not come out during the day because it hurts their skin, and maybe bad things happen in the village, and then you have the lore of vampire start to form. In a similar vein, you've got the superstitions in New England. So now we're gonna switch outlooks. So I've talked about maybe sunlight exposure and anemic need of blood. I think pretty universal parts of the vampire mythos. But why are they undead? Where did that come from? And I think part of it came from New England and the hysteria that exists in this part of the world. I am in New England in Boston. I live very close to Salem, where they had the witch trials and all the hysteria around that. There is a large attachment to using the supernatural to explain medical phenomenon here. And that was no different when there was tuberculosis at its high here in the, I believe, 1800s. Now, this is before germ theory, which if you don't know, germ theory is the idea that disease is spread through small organisms that you cannot see, right? So before germ theory, how disease was spread was very not well understood. So what would happen in these towns is your family member gets tuberculosis or consumption, essentially the disease in movies where people cough into napkins and there's blood and you're like, oh no, they're gonna die. That's the disease I'm talking about, if you didn't know. Their relatives would die, and then soon they would be sick and die. And they didn't have germ theory, so they didn't realize that their family member probably got them sick while they were alive, or maybe during the burial process. Instead, they thought that their family members were basically coming back from the dead and getting them sick. And this was further confounded because they would then go to these burial sites, dig up the graves, and because they didn't understand body preservation in different climates and weather, they would see a preserved body and decide, yeah, this person is coming back at night to make us sick and then going back to their coffin. So that's kind of where this undead thing comes from, is people were attributing their getting sick to their lost loved ones, which was ironically true, but they literally thought that their family members were monsters coming back to get them sick because we didn't understand germ theory or body decomposition. So I thought these were two interesting medical outlooks about this portion of the vampire mythos. I personally couldn't find things for like why they can't see themselves in mirrors or why they need to be invited in. If you have any ideas for that, feel free to let me know. I think someone with porphyria was like, well, if their skin gets damaged, they just don't want to be in pictures or mirrors, or if they look anemic, they don't want that. Maybe. I don't know. I just also think that there comes a point with once you've created a monster, whether it was based on fact, it just spirals to fit the scenario of the day. People get bored, people love to tell stories. Now, if you've made it this far and just want me to know you're here, leave a vampire or a bat in the description. If you have any questions, I'll always answer to the best of my ability. If you have additional knowledge, fill that in the comments. Any medical or scientific knowledge you know is related to this mythos or other Halloween monsters, I would love to read that. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. And happy Halloween. Bye.